नमस्तुते। तप्त कांचन गौरांगी राधे वृंदावनेश्वरी वृषभानुसुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये। वाञ्छाकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्य एव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्तवृंद। हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे।
Tita.
Prabhu, could you please enable screen sharing? I'll share the screen.
Yes, you can try now. Yes, we can see.
Okay, great. Hare Krishna, everyone. So we'll be discussing from Bhagavad Gita, chapter 13, verse 13. I'll start with the recitation of the shloka, and everyone else can follow it after me. Gyeyam yat tat pravakshami yat kyatvamritam ashnute anadi mat param brahma na sattan nasaduchyate.
You do one line at a time, and then we read one line at a time.
Yeah, one line at a time.
Oh, okay. Gyeyam yat tat pravakshami
Gyeyam yat pravakshami
yat kyatvamritam ashnute
yajñātvamritam ashnute
anadimat param brahma
Brahma
na sattan nasaduchyate.
nasanna sasadichyate.
Gyeyam yat tat pravakshami
Gyeyam yat pravakshami
yat kyatvamritam ashnute
yadvatvatmritamashtate
anadimat param brahma
anadi param brahma
na sattan nasaduchyate.
nasad nasa uchyate.
Gyeyam yat tat pravakshami
Yatasya pakshami
yajgyatvam ashnute
yajgatamasamichyate
anadimat param brahma
anadi param brahma
na sattan nasaduchyate.
Asaddhana
anadi asamuchyate.
Okay, would someone like to chant?
Gyeyam
Gyeyam yat tat pravakshami
yajñātvamritam ashnute
yajgyatvam ashnute
anadimat param brahma
anadimat param brahma
anadi param brahma na sattan nasat uchyate
न सत्तन्नासदुच्यते
Saduchyate. Nyayam yattat pravakshyami.
ज्ञेयं यत्तत्र वक्ष्यामि
Yajñātvāmritam ashnute.
यस्यात्वामृतमश्नुते
Anadimat param brahma.
अनादिमत्परं ब्रह्म
Na satta nashaduchyate.
न सत्तन्नासदुच्यते.
Is there a delay in hearing? People are taking a long time responding.
A long delay. It's a long delay. It's really not good connection, I think.
Yeah, it's not good. The connection is not very
Yes,
good.
I also feel the same. Yes, Mataji.
I think I can hear everyone clearly, but it's just the delay. So when he's speaking, it's going to be fine. But when we're chanting, it's not synchronized very well.
Yeah, then maybe he can just speak for himself.
Fine with me.
I seem to be having good connection. I'm actually having, I don't feel any lag.
Okay, so I'll start with the word by word meaning. Gyeyam, the knowable.
No,
Yeah.
Yat, which.
Yat,
Yeah, which.
Tat, that.
Tat,
That.
that.
Pravakshyami, I shall now explain.
I shall now explain.
Shall now explain.
Pravakshyami, I shall now explain.
Yat,
explain.
which.
Yat, which.
That which.
Yatva, knowing.
Yatva, knowing.
Yatra, knowing.
Amritam, nectar.
Amritam,
nectar.
Nectar.
Ashnute, one tastes.
Asnute, one taste.
Vasute, one.
Anadi, beginningless.
Anadi,
beginner.
beginningless.
Matparam, subordinate to me.
Matparam, subordinate to me.
Subordinate to me.
Brahm, spirit.
Brahma, spirit.
From spirit.
No, neither.
No, neither.
No, neither.
Sat, cause.
Sat,
Sat, cause.
Tat, that.
Tat,
Tat, that.
No, nor.
No, nor.
No, nor.
Asat, effect.
Asat, effect.
Asat, effect.
Uchyate, is said to be.
Uchyate is said to be.
Is said to be.
Okay. I'll now read the translation. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. I shall now explain the knowable, knowing which you will taste the eternal. Brahm, the spirit, beginningless and subordinate to me, lies beyond the cause and effect of this material world. I'll read it once again. I shall now explain the knowable, knowing which you will taste the eternal. Brahman, the spirit, beginningless and subordinate to me, lies beyond the cause and effect of this material world. I will now read the purport. The Lord has explained the field of activities and the knower of the field. He has also explained the process of knowing, the knower of the field of activities. Now he begins to explain the knowable, first the soul and then the super soul. By knowledge of the knower, both the soul and the super soul, one can relish the nectar of life. As explained in the second chapter, the living entity is eternal, This is also confirmed here. There is no specific date at which the Jiva was born, nor can anyone trace out the history of the Jivatma's manifestation from the Supreme Lord. Therefore, it is beginningless. The Vedic literature confirms this. Na jayate mrite va vipaschit. Katha Upanishad 1-18. The knower of the body is never born and never dies, and he is full of knowledge. The Supreme Lord, as the Super Soul, is also stated in the Vedic literature, Shweta Upanishad 6:16, to be Pradhan Kshetragya Patir Gunesha, the chief knower of the body and the master of the three modes of material nature. In the Smriti, it is said, Dasa Bhuto, Harer Eva Nanyasvaiva Kadachana. The living entities are eternally in the service of the Supreme Lord. This is also confirmed by Lord Chaitanya in his teachings. Therefore, the description of Brahman mentioned in this verse is in relation to the individual soul. And when the word Brahman is applied to the living entity, it is to be understood that he is Vigyan Brahm as opposed to Anand Brahm. Anand Brahm is the supreme Brahman personality of Godhead. So this is one of the most important verses in Bhagavad Gita for me. I mean, every verse in Bhagavad Gita is important, but I particularly like this one because it essentially directly answers one of the most fundamental questions of life, which is, what is knowable or what is worth knowing? Because if you think about it, we spend our entire lives in the pursuit of knowledge, right? I mean, a kid at the age of 3, he starts with preschool, then he goes to kindergarten, right? And then the elementary school, the middle school, the high school, so on and so forth. A very good amount of time of a person or a human's life is spent, basically in the pursuit of knowledge, right? So since knowledge is so fundamental to our existence as humans, it is worth knowing that whatever we are pursuing in terms of knowledge, does it make sense or not? Is it worth knowing or not, right? And this verse, Krishna is directly answering that question, that what it is that is really or ultimately worth knowing. And therefore, this is really, really significant. So when it comes to knowledge, not just that we are pursuing knowledge when we are in school or in college, even beyond that, there is so much knowledge to be gained, right? For example, currently we are in the middle of a crisis. There is a coronavirus situation that's going on, and there's a huge body of humans, very well-known scientists who are trying to find out what this virus is. And it is nothing new, right? So coronavirus has been there before. There was SARS, there was MERS, but it changed itself, right? So the subject matter or the target keeps changing. So really it's a moving target. So you know one thing, but at a later point, whatever you knew changed, right? And at that point, you have to pursue that knowledge again. So the question we should be asking is that really worth knowing? I mean, of course, to know about coronavirus, it's important. It will help us to find a vaccine and all of that. I'm not trying to undermine the importance of that knowledge, but one should ask this question, that what it is that would really end this pursuit of seeking knowledge all the time for us as humans, right? And that is what Krishna is pointing to here in this verse. He is saying that knowing which you will taste the eternal, right? And that's the ultimate outcome that all of us are seeking, right? Where does all of this end? Because no matter how much we seek or how much we know, it's a moving target. We just keep moving from one piece of knowledge to the next piece of knowledge. A piece of knowledge that was very, very important, let's say 100 years ago, may not be so very much relevant today. I'm in the field of data analytics, and whatever we do, right? I mean, it's changing so fast. You learn something today, and 2 years later, it has totally changed, and then you need to learn that new thing again, right? And the worst part is when you die, all of this knowledge ends with you, right? It's not that if you die today, you take birth the next time. So in this birth, you already did your PhD. So the next birth, you don't have to go to elementary school, right? It's not like that, unfortunately. So the wheel starts all over again, right? So it's like chewing the chewed. We've already done this, but it dies with this body, right? So the next time when we take birth again, you have to start afresh, right? So we are just totally stuck in this never-ending wheel. And Krishna is essentially saying that if you actually know what is worth knowing, you will taste the eternal, or you will taste something after which you don't really have to pursue anything else, right? So that would be the end, right? So when he says eternal, right? So what does that mean? As I just mentioned, right? Everything that we pursue here is ephemeral. It stays for some time and then it changes. But who we actually are, right? We are actually eternal. Na jayate mrite va kadachin nayam bhutva bhavita vana bhuya ajo nityo shashvato yam purano na hanyate hanyamane sharir. That's really the definition of Brahma. Right? So we as individual soul, Jivatma, our existence, who we actually are, is eternal. However, because of our foolishness, we think we identify ourselves with this body, which is temporary, and therefore we are suffering in this world. Right? So here, Krishna is pointing to that. He's saying that if you actually know Brahma, right, and by Brahma, there is a direct reference to Jivatma, as Prabhupada is mentioning in this verse. Brahma is directly referring to the Jivatma, or who we actually are. But there is also an implied reference to the super soul or Paramatma, right? So you have to know about Jivatma, about Paramatma, and the relationship between the two. That Jivatma is the eternal servant of Paramatma or Krishna. So this word Brahman in this particular verse is really, really important. Prabhupada gives a beautiful explanation explaining about what does this word Brahman means, right? So he's saying in this verse, Brahman is used in the context of the living individual soul. And then he says that whenever we refer to Jivatma as Brahma, it's actually Vijnana Brahma as opposed to Anand Brahma. So Brahma could be used for both Jivatma as well as Paramatma, but Prabhupada is clarifying the difference between both, right? So Jivatma is Vijnana Brahma and Paramatma is Ananda Brahma, right? So Ananda Brahma is essentially the one who does not depend on anything else for his Ananda or his blissful existence, because he's Satchidananda Vigraha. So for him to stay blissful, he is not dependent on anything. He's completely, supremely independent. Whereas us, Jivatma, the term that is used is Vijnana Brahma, because we have to understand this science that we are the eternal servant of Krishna, of Paramatma. And only by serving Krishna, by understanding that we are the eternal servants of Krishna, we can attain to that blissful state. Although we are part and parcel of the same Brahma, Satchidananda Vigraha, we are also a part and parcel of that. But we can forget our relationship with Krishna, and that would put us into misery, or that would take us away from that bliss or that Anand state that all of us are seeking. Whereas Ananda Brahma, Paramatma, he is not subdued by forgetfulness. He is completely independent, full of knowledge, and he's full of bliss. Right? So that is the difference, and that is the key thing here to understand, that it is not sufficient for us to just understand that we are Brahma. Right? Many spiritual scholars misunderstand. They think that I am Brahma, I am an eternal living spirit, I am not this body. Although that is correct, right? But it is not the complete understanding of the absolute truth. And till the point we have that complete understanding, we cannot get away from this temporary existence. And Krishna has clarified that very nicely and very beautifully at multiple places across the Bhagavad Gita. Brahma bhut prasannatma na shochati na kamshati sama sarveshu bhuteshu mad bhakti labate param. So Krishna is saying, Brahma bhut prasannatma. Okay, you understand that you are Brahma. But eventually that understanding should naturally lead one to bhakti, Krishna bhakti, mad bhakti labhate param, right? So that should be the natural progression. So knowing that I am Brahma is not sufficient. We have to come to this bhakti platform. And what will happen when we perform bhakti? We will become a bhakta or a devotee. And then what is the importance of becoming a bhakta, or what happens when we pursue bhakti? And Krishna is saying, Bhakti amam abhijanati yavan cha asmi tatruta tato mam tatruto gyatva vishate tad anantaram. It's a beautiful verse, right? So, Bhakti amam abhijanati. Only a devotee can understand me completely, in essence. Yavan cha asmi tatvata. Tatvata means in essence. Only by pursuing bhakti, a person can understand who I truly am. And what happens after that? Vishate tad anantaram. By understanding that who I am, by pursuing bhakti, he can stay with me eternally, right? And that's what we always want. An eternal blissful existence by serving the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And what happens to those people who just stay at this understanding that I am Brahma, but their faith does not strengthen, or they do not evolve themselves into the pursuit of bhakti? So Krishna is mentioning that as well. Ashraddhana pursa dharma se asya parantapa akape mam nivartante mrityu sansara vartmani. Krishna is saying. So someone who is not able to develop the taste towards the devotional service, eventually he comes back into the cycle of birth and death. Ashraddhana purusha dharma se asya parantapa aprapya mam. Ultimately he is not able to attain me. Nivartante, returns back. Mrityu sansara vartamani, on the path of this material existence. Right. So what is critical here is that we have to have the complete understanding of the absolute personality of Godhead, Krishna, which is only possible if we follow the path of bhakti. Many people can misunderstand this verse, because this verse Brahma, the word Brahman itself, is used in many different ways, right? As Prabhupada is mentioning, it is used for Jivatma, it is used for the supreme truth. But sometimes people can say that just by understanding that I am Brahma is good enough, which actually is not the case. As I mentioned, across Bhagavad Gita, Krishna has mentioned it at several places. And the people who actually understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the absolute truth, they use different terms sometimes to describe that same supreme truth, right? Vadanti tat tatvavidas yanti tat jnanam advayam brahmeti paramatmeti bhagwan iti shabdate, right? So in Srimad Bhagavatam it is mentioned that the knowers of the truth can refer to the absolute truth in different ways as Brahma, Paramatma and Bhagwan. Right, and our acharyas have given beautiful commentary about it, right? So they give the example of sun, like we have the effulgence of the sun rays, then we have the sun planet, and then we have the sun god, right? So in one way you can say that the sun rays, the sun planet and the sun god, they are all the same thing. It depends on how you look at them. But Prabhupada in the purport of this verse says very clearly that the ultimate when it comes to defining the absolute truth, Supreme Personality of Godhead Krishna is the ultimate definition of the absolute truth. So we should not foolishly think that just by understanding that I am Brahma and Krishna is also Brahma, it's not sufficient. We actually have to understand the personality of God. We have to understand Krishna, and we have to understand what is our relationship with him, right? Only by our ability to understand and appreciate that, and by performing the devotional service as prescribed by our acharyas, as prescribed by our guru, it's possible to understand. Without that, it is impossible to understand Krishna as he actually is. Right. So that's why that pursuit is really, really important. Out of many, many people, only a very few are actually hankering for that perfection, right? And out of those many people who are hankering for perfection, very few actually understand who Krishna is, right? So we should consider ourselves to be extremely fortunate that we have been exposed to this knowledge of the bhakti, and by performing this bhakti, we can attain the ultimate perfection, right? And as Krishna is saying in Bhagavad Gita, Bahunam Janmanam Ante Jnanavan Mam Prapadyate Vasudeva Sarvamiti Sam Atma Sudurlabha, he's saying. So it takes many lifetimes for someone to come to this platform. Bahunam Janmanam Ante Jnanavan, people who are intelligent, who are in knowledge, Mam Prapadyate, they surrender unto me. Vasudeva Sarvamiti, that I am the Samam Bonam, I am the absolute truth. People who understand that, some Mahatma, such great souls, so Durlabha, extremely rare. So Durlabh means rare, so Durlabh means extremely rare, right? So by understanding that Krishna is the one who is worth knowing, right? He is the ultimate subject matter of the pursuit of knowledge. To understand that takes many lifetimes for a spirit soul to understand and appreciate. And once we come to a platform where we could actually do that, it is very important for us to pursue it very seriously, right? And how do you do that? Because in our day-to-day lives, we are so busy doing so many things, right? I mean, there are kids that we have to take care of, family, there is work, occupational duties that are going on. So to be able to find time to pursue bhakti, the path that is recommended to us by our acharyas, that is why it is extremely important for us to pursue that really seriously. You know, as one of my favorite verses from Srimad Bhagavatam, Savai Pumsam Paro Dharmo Tato Bhakti Radhokshaja Ahaituki Apratihata Ye Atma Suprasidati. Savai Pumsam Paro Dharmo. Dharma means occupational duty, right? So what is the topmost form of occupational duty? Savai Pumsam Paro Dharmo Tato Bhakti Radhokshaja. The one that leads to the devotional service of Krishna. Right? So we have to sort of mold our lives, mold our occupational duties in a way that leads us towards the bhakti of Adokshaj, or the Supreme Person. We have to somehow design our lifestyles so that we can pursue this knowledge, the perfect knowledge, or the subject matter of perfect knowledge, Krishna. We have to mold our lives in a way that by performing bhakti, we can understand the subject matter. And what will happen when we do that, and why is it so important? Savai Pumsam Paro Dharmo Tato Bhakti Radhokshaja Ahaituki Apratihata Yayatma Suprasidati. Right? So what will happen when we do that? Yayatma Suprasidati. That will give complete satisfaction to our Atma, or who we are, right? So that is what we are all seeking, right? If you ask a student, right, who is working so hard for his exams, right, that why are you putting in so much hard work into your studies? And he would say, because I want to get good grades, right? Then you say, you know, what will happen when you get good grades? He will say, I'll get a good job. And then you ask him, why do you want a good job, right? He'll say, well, so that I can make good money. And why do you want to make good money? So that I can have a good life, I can have a nice house, I can have a good car, I have good food to eat, right? And what will happen by obtaining all of that? And he will say, so that, you know, I can stay happy, right? So everything ends at that one point. If you ask a person, why do you want to stay happy? Most of the people will not be able to answer, right? But we have the answer in the Shastra, right? Because we are part and parcel of the one who is supremely happy. And that's why it's our innate nature to seek that happiness, to pursue that happiness, right? So by performing the devotional service, we can attain that natural state by serving the Supreme Personality of Godhead. the absolute knowledge, the one who is actually worth knowing, right? We can attain to that state, the natural state of bliss. So we have to somehow practice our day-to-day lives in a way so that we can be Krishna conscious all the time. And that's why Prabhupada and our acharyas have provided us such a beautiful system of Krishna consciousness, wherein, you get up early in the morning, you go do Mangal Aarti, you chant your 16 rounds, you listen to Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, right? So the entire day, you are busy in your day-to-day activities, but at the same time, at the top level, you are always conscious that you are part and parcel of Krishna. So somehow, although it's very, very difficult, as we've all realized, and especially I'm talking from my own realization, the most difficult part is to chant sincerely. And it's a real struggle to chant and to think about Krishna, because mind is always running, right? There is so much going on and you always keep fighting. But eventually, if we totally and 100% are committed to the process, right? Our acharyas have given us this promise that we will be able to attain that state of mind, right? So we have to be diligent, and all across the scriptures, this has been described in great detail, that how by pursuing bhakti, right, by practicing Krishna consciousness, we can understand the absolute knowledge. We can understand Krishna, who he is. We can understand our position, who we are, about Jivatma, that we are eternal parts and parcel of Krishna, and that our position is to eternally serve Krishna, and by doing that, we can eternally stay blissful, right? So that's the eventual goal, the eventual objective, or the perfect knowledge. So along with whatever we are pursuing right now, along with knowing so many things, material stuff that we have to learn, of course, for us to be able to sustain in this material world, all of that knowledge is important, right? But if we spend too much time, or our entire effort, our entire consciousness in just understanding the material knowledge, eventually it's sham eva hi kevalam, right? That's what the scriptures mention. It's of no use, right? Because as soon as you die, right, that knowledge will die with you. As I just mentioned, right, you may have achieved a PhD degree in this birth, but when you take another birth, if you take a human birth, that is, right? I mean, if someone takes an animal birth, he does not even qualify to attain knowledge. It's basically a bhog yoni, where you have to just experience pains and pleasures of that life. But if you attain a human form of life, you cannot start from PhD. You again have to start from scratch. But Krishna mentions in Bhagavad Gita that the spiritual knowledge, right, whatever progress we have made in this life to understand this, to obtain this particular knowledge about who we are, who the Supreme Person is, and what is our relationship to him, right? The topmost subject matter, whatever progress a person makes in a life, that goes with him even in the next birth. That's why we see so many times some people, they come to Krishna consciousness and it hardly takes any effort for them to take up Krishna consciousness, right? They just naturally, they are able to appreciate the subject matter described in Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. They just, there was a friend of mine when I was in college. I used to think like, he used to be so mischievous. He used to do all sorts of nonsensical things. And I used to think he's probably just wasting his time. I understood a little bit of Krishna consciousness at that time. Then once I took him, at my college, we used to have the temple president from Delhi. He used to come here, give classes on Bhagavad Gita. So I somehow once convinced him to attend that. And he attended just one lecture. And immediately after that, he just totally changed. I was so surprised I mean, that was the last person who I could have imagined will get into Krishna consciousness, and he just reluctantly came to me. But as soon as he heard from him, as soon as he heard the subject matter, Bhagavad Gita, he was totally transformed. He just picked it up. He told me that actually this is what he was looking for, and I was so surprised. So this is how it works. I mean, for some people, you can see that they are just able to immediately connect, right? So that consciousness, whatever a person has done, to whatever level a person has attained perfection in this knowledge stays with him, and it goes with him to the next life, right? And he's provided sufficient opportunity to move on from where he left, right? And at that point he can start and eventually attain perfection. And I mean, that's the whole objective of this material world, right? This material world is essentially a training ground wherein all of Jivatmas, all of the living entities, right? We are all struggling in this material existence because of our forgetfulness of our relationship with the Supreme. But the design of this material world, because the designer is the Supreme Person, Krishna himself, right? And he's always eager for the living entities to come back to him so that we can revive that consciousness about him. The world has been designed to facilitate that, really. So ample opportunities are provided, but as soon as an opportunity is provided, it is on the living entity because we have a free will, right? So how do we use that free will to take up Krishna consciousness? That is on us, because Krishna never forcefully intervenes into anyone's free will. He always respects our free will. So although there is ample opportunities around us, I mean, we are sitting here in the US, and even in India, I see people, the kids, the way here, our kids are able to understand Bhagavad Gita. Our kids are getting trained in Sanskrit, in Bhagavad Gita verses. In India, kids are totally distracted. They are going in a different direction, right? So there is ample opportunity that has been provided by the mercy of Srila Prabhupada. You go to whichever corner of the world, you will always find some way to be connected to Krishna. Like in 2013, when I was pursuing a master's from Yale, I went for an internship to Africa, to Kenya, right? And I was really, really concerned because I went there and no one really could understand how a person survive on vegetarian food. I was amazed. I mean, they were surprised when I told them that I'm a vegetarian. They're like, how can you sustain yourself? So I was not even in Nairobi. I was in Kisumu, which is like the third biggest city, but it's a small city in Kenya. And right at the place where I was staying, hardly 3 kilometers from there was a beautiful ISKCON temple. And His Grace Prabhu is the temple president there. And he's a wonderful Kirtanya. And there was nice tulsi plants all around the temple. Very beautiful temple. And I used to go there every morning and every evening for my meals. Everyone else used to do all sorts of things, but I was always missing in the mornings and in the evenings. And they used to ask me all the time, where do you go? So I told them that, look, I go to the temple because I'm a vegetarian and it's so difficult for me to find a vegetarian meal around here. Although they arranged for it, but they don't have very much skill when it comes to vegetarian food. That I realized there. And in the temple, we had wonderful cooks. There was a huge Gujarati community there, and they were really serving very nicely in the temple. So I used to go there, have my meals there, listen to the Kirtan by Gurunakesh Prabhu every evening. I used to attend Gaur Arati. They used to go to disco, because most of the people who were with me, they were students from Yale. Some were pursuing their undergrads, right? So young, I was also about 26 at that time, I think, 27. So at that time, they used to go out to the discotheques and have fun, whereas I used to go to the temple. And after having a prasadam, I used to go and take rest and then get up early in the morning. So ultimately, they were so frustrated. They actually once told me that we want to take a look and find out where do you go. So the very last day of my visit, I actually invited them for a chappan bhog prasadam meal at the temple. And there were around 40 people that I took along with me. So the entire office where I was working, it was a renewable energies company. They used to create wind turbines. So most of them were local African and a few of my colleagues from Yale. I took all of them to the temple and we served them because it was a chappan bhog, a very lavish meal. And when they had that prasad, when they had that food, they were like, if the vegetarian food is like this, we can turn vegetarian today. They were so happy after having that. So Krishna Prasadam has that potency, and this entire process of Krishna consciousness has been designed in such a way we don't have to do anything. I mean, it has been made so easy for us. As Krishna is saying, Raja Vidya Raja Guhyam Paramam Idam Uttamam Pratyaksh Avgamam Dharmam Susukham Kartum Avyayam. Susukham Kartum, right? It's pleasant, very, very nicely performed without any distress. It's actually, if one practices it, it gives one pleasure, right? You just have nice prasad, have, chant, sing nicely. Everyone enjoys music, right? You just have to relish Krishna Kirtan, and you have to read these wonderful stories of Krishna's pastimes from Bhagavatam. What could be easier than this? This is actually fun, right? So, Susukham Kartum, very pleasantly done. Avyayam, right? The point that I was mentioning earlier, that this vyaya means to spend, right? So this knowledge cannot be spent. You can only gain. So once you go at a certain level, that knowledge stays with you and it gets revived when you go to the next life, right? So to conclude, we discussed here how Krishna is explaining the ultimate object of knowledge, or explaining the knowable, right? And in that context, he's saying, using the term Brahman, and Prabhupada is giving us the explanation that by Brahman, Krishna is saying Jivatma as well as Paramatma, and we have to understand who is Jivatma, who is Paramatma, that is Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and what is our relationship with him. And once we understand this, that leads us, or that gives us the taste of eternal. That leads us to the entire objective of this life, which is to stay eternally with Krishna in a loving service, in a loving devotional service. And that is our natural state to which we belong. And that is where the cycle of birth and death ends. So with that, I will stop. It's 7:45. Anyone has any questions or comments?
In this particular verse, 13.13, is Lord Krishna speaking about the Jivatma in every individual, or is he speaking about himself?
Jivatma is the individual living entity, and that's what he's referring to. Right? So if I understood that question, you're saying that...
That is why he is saying that it is subordinate to me.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So when he... Because
subordinate
we
to
as
me
Jivatma...
is to be understood.
Right.
Because that is not explicit in the shloka itself.
Yeah, that is a good point, right? So
what is worth
the reason
knowing,
he's
that
saying...
I will tell you. What is worth understanding, and which feels like taking Amrit nectar, which doesn't have a beginning, which doesn't have an end, which is not, can't be said as true, can't be said as false. That Brahma I will tell you about. That is what he's saying.
Right. So that's why we need to understand it from the purport, because someone who just reads the translation, he can get confused. He could think that he is only saying that if a person understands Brahma as Jivatma, that is good enough for one to taste the eternal, right? So they can get confused, and especially because Krishna is also saying that he is subordinate to me. So that could be confusing. And that is why we need purports from Srila Prabhupada. Because Srila Prabhupada in the verse is very clear. He's saying that Krishna is, although directly he is referring to Jivatma as Brahman, but it is implied in the same verse that he is talking about Paramatma as well. And actually in the next verse, it is more clear.
Right. I read the next two verses, and there he explains.
Right. Because, Krishna, we have to understand, Krishna is in the middle of the battlefield. There is a battle going on. So he's choosing his words because he cannot elaborate everything in great detail, because there is a war to be fought. Right. And that's why we need the commentaries from our acharyas, right? So here Prabhupada is making it very, very clear for us. He's saying that although the direct reference is to Jivatma, but Paramatma is implied in this verse. And as if you read the next verse, next translations, the next verses, you would find out that that is indeed right? So he's talking about Brahma, when he's saying Brahman, he's talking about Jivatma directly, but Paramatma is implied in this. So one has to understand Jivatma, one has to understand Paramatma, the Supreme Person, and one has to understand how the two are related. That constitutes what is knowable, and by knowing that, one will attain the perfection of life. Does that make sense?
So he is actually talking of, is he talking of himself, or is Lord Krishna telling about
Krishna?
Paramatma, that is himself, in this verse?
Yes. That is, so as I said, here the word is Brahman, right? Prabhupada is further elaborating on that and saying Paramatma, but the other verse that I referred from Srimad Bhagavatam, Vadanti Tat Tattvavidas, where basically that verse mentions that the knowers of the absolute truth, they use this term Brahma, Paramatma, and Bhagavan, these three interchangeably sometimes. And we should not get confused by it, because so we have to understand what Brahma, Paramatma, and Bhagavan is. So Brahma is the effulgence of the Supreme Person. It's like sun rays coming out of the sun, right? So that is Brahma. Paramatma is the partial expansion of Krishna, which exists in every one of our hearts. So Paramatma exists in each individual living entity, and he travels with every living entity. So that is the partial expansion of Krishna. And then Bhagavan, he is the Supreme Person himself. So although these three terms sometimes are used by the absolute knowers of the truth interchangeably, but we have to understand that the perfect knowledge is for us to understand that the absolute truth is the Supreme Person, that is Krishna. Although when you talk, for example, if I talk about sun, I can talk about sun rays, I can talk about sun globes, assuming that if I'm talking about sun rays, it is evident that there has to be a sun god. There has to be a sun, because without sun, there are no sun rays, really, right? So sometimes the knowers of the truth use these three terms interchangeably, but the absolute truth is the Supreme Person, the absolute personality of the Godhead. So when he says Paramatma here, the reference is to the Supreme Absolute Truth, Krishna.
But then why does the purport say he's subordinate to me?
That's because the direct reference is to Jivatma, right? So Brahman, the direct reference in this verse is to Jivatma, and Jivatma is subordinate to Krishna.
So it's like chapters of organization. So there is
Sorry, what was
ISKCON,
that?
there is ISKCON, and
Yes.
there are individual chapters of ISKCON. Each has the same philosophy and thought behind, same way of understanding the material world. Even if you take the head office of ISKCON, or if you take the most far-flung center of ISKCON, or something that is not yet a temple, but it is the same thought that pervades throughout. Same
That is correct, yeah.
understanding of the world and how the group should conduct.
Yeah, absolutely. Because just like if you go to a school, right? If that school is affiliated from a central body, like in India we have AICTE, right? There's a central body. Yeah, right. So the syllabus would be the same. It doesn't matter which school you go.
Yeah.
So similarly, even when we are pursuing the spiritual knowledge, it has to come in a disciplic succession. There are 4 different sampradayas, right? So we belong to Brahma Sampradaya, Brahma Madhva Gaudiya Sampradaya, which is one of the schools that provides perfect knowledge. So the syllabus for all of us is the same. The syllabus as has been given to us in Bhagavad Gita, right? So all of us understand Bhagavad Gita the way it has been provided to us. So no matter where you go, which ISKCON center you go, you will be provided the same understanding of the material world, the spiritual world, what they are, how they exist. And this is not something that we have created on our own. This is something that has been provided by Krishna himself. As I mentioned about disciplic succession, right? So the knowledge is flowing from the absolute truth. So there is a guru, and that guru has many of his disciples, right? And that disciple is taking that knowledge, and then he has other disciples. So that way, that knowledge is coming down from top to bottom.
Yeah. Thank you. So the next verse, I was just skimming through, I realized the next verse actually explains that how this Jivatma in one person and Paramatma,
Right.
how the Paramatma is actually, it's like his hands and his legs, his head, his eyes, his ears, everything is everywhere. And he's situated everywhere.
Yep. Right. Yep. And there, if you read the translation again, Prabhupada is using, he's clearly mentioning Paramatma there, right? So Krishna in this verse is not directly mentioning Paramatma, but it is implied as explained to us in the purport by Srila Prabhupada. But when you go to the next verses, you would understand that Krishna actually implied Paramatma in this verse, in 13th. So Prabhupada already lets us know that in the purport so that people don't get confused.
Thank you, Prabhuji.
Thank you, Prabhuji.
Thank you.
Thank
Have
you.
a nice night. Thank you.
You too. Thanks. Anyone else?
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Very, very nice realization
Hare
what you
Krishna.
shared about Kenya. So I really liked that.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I also
Means,
enjoyed that.
inviting people, and many people first time when they come, they get really like the prasadam. And Prabhupada also said that you should serve the prasadam profusely, not just a small amount. Profusely, you have to serve the prasadam.
Right.
And I think that's what you invited to them to the temple, and you served them. Very nice, Prabhu.
Right. Yeah. 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 That was a really, really nice experience. And that made me realize that how fortunate we are, right? And what a wonderful thing Prabhupada did for us, right? I mean, who could think of, if just imagine before Prabhupada came, no one would have thought that you go to a remote corner of the world, someplace like Kenya in a small town, and you are able to get Krishna Prasad and Krishna Kirtan, right? It was simply impossible for us to even imagine. But Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, because he's so merciful, right? Through Prabhupada as his Senapati, he made this wonderful arrangement for people like us. So even after that arrangement has been made for us, it has been made so easy for us to take up to Krishna consciousness. If you're not able to do that, there cannot be anything worse than that for us, right? If you're not able to do that. So that realization just stuck me at that point, that Prabhupada has done everything for us. Everything has been done by the mercy of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Srila Prabhupada. And even now, if we don't take it, just shame on us.
Whenever I think of ISKCON, I'm reminded of a bamboo, right? So a bamboo tree, when you start seeing the shoot outside, it has had tremendous root growth for a few years underneath the ground.
Right.
So
yes.
Srila Prabhupada spent nearly the entire life building his roots in India, and then the seed was able to grow out in a totally different kind of world.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. What he did was out of this world, really. I mean, it was transcendental. There is no doubt. Otherwise, it was impossible, right? So,
right, because there are so many other Bhakti Sampradayas, Vaishnava Bhakti Sampradaya in India, who also teach the same thing. But the sheer scale of what Srila Prabhupada has been able to achieve.
Right. Yeah. And that's because of his purity, right? Because of on the strength of his purity. So we are all benefiting from that today, even today, and for generations to come. I mean, he made all of the arrangements for us. All we have to do is just take up to it and just stick with it sincerely. And that's what we should all
follow the prescribed path.
To do. Exactly. Yeah. And you will automatically be led to the perfection of life.
Hare Krishna, Ankur Prabhu.
So I think it's 7:56.
Hare Krishna, Ankur Prabhu. It was
Any other
excellent
last?
class.
Yes. Thank you.
Very
Thank you.
nice class.
Thank you
Prabhu.
so much.
Thank you.
Very nice class. I really liked
Thank
it.
you.
Again today especially I'm reminded of the difference between a knower and someone who can disseminate the knowledge, right? So there may be hundreds of people who probably know and have understood these verses, but explaining
Right.
it like you did is really good.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm grateful. I'm simply repeating what I heard from the Acharyas, really. Nothing more than that. But I'm glad
Yeah,
that
but
my words.
see, many others have heard the same thing as you have heard when you were learning.
Mhm. Yeah.
But breaking it apart into 100 pieces and then fitting those 100 pieces in the minds of those who are listening
Mhm.
is a skill,
Yeah.
maybe
No.
a blessing, maybe
Right.
grace of Srila Prabhupada, Lord Krishna,
Right.
and the Acharya Parampara.
Yeah. Right.
It's commendable.
Yeah. No, really appreciate the gesture,
And
Prabhu.
especially, I was like, when I saw you, I was like, okay, this person is young. Will he be able to explain?
Yeah.
So
No,
I
I myself
need to
was nervous
accept that
because
I had a bias when I first saw you, and you were able to dispel that bias.
no, I'm really grateful. I mean, in fact, I would like to just say I was really nervous. It's His Grace Pyari Prabhu and Jiva Mataji, they have instilled so much energy into us, and they have made us understand these concepts so nicely that we are able to do whatever I was able to do right now. It's not really me; it's really them,
No, I know
because they
it's
have been
Acharya
serving
Parampara
Sri
flowing through.
Gauranga. Right.
It's
Right.
like better has to be passed, right?
Yeah.
In a relay.
Right.
If the knowledge
Absolutely.
cannot be passed to the next generation, then why are we
Yeah.
humans?
Absolutely. No doubt. Yep. Thank you so much, Prabhu.
Thank you so
Really
much.
appreciate it. So I think it's 8. Pyari Prabhuji, Jiva Mataji, would you like to conclude?
Well, we would like to offer our respectful obeisances unto all the Vaishnava devotees of the Lord. We're just like
Vancha
presiding.
kalpatarabhyascha
Kripa sindhubhya eva cha.
Vaishnavebhyo
Anam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha.
Hare Krishna. Very nice class,
Hare
Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna, very nice
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Hare Krishna,
Hare Krishna.
Tulsi.
Tulsi has to say this, otherwise the class